could happen to you. I remember one time I was not paying attention, and then I looked up and it was midway through the film. I was reading something, looked up and I thought, oh my God.
She was the face of 90s Hollywood, stunning, talented, and born into one of the most powerful film dynasties. Bridget Fonda had it all. A-list roles, red carpet charm, and a last name that opened every door. Then one day she vanished. No scandal, no farewell, just silence. For years, fans asked the same question. What really happened to Bridget Fonda? And why did she walk away from the very thing most people spend their lives chasing? This is not a Hollywood tragedy. It's something much deeper. Stick around because her story might just change the way you see fame forever. Born into Fame, The Fonda Legacy explores Bridget's family background, growing up in a dynasty of Hollywood royalty, daughter of Peter Fonda, niece of Jane Fonda, granddaughter of Henry Fonda. It sets the foundation for her early exposure to fame, pressure, and artistic expectation. Before she ever stepped onto a movie set, Bridget Fonda was already part of Hollywood history. She did not have to chase the spotlight. It was there before she was even born. Her grandfather, Henry Fonda, was an icon of the golden age of cinema. Her father, Peter Fonda, was the rebellious spirit of the 1960s, known for Easy Rider. Her aunt, Jane Fonda, was both a glamorous star and a vocal activist. With a last name like Fonda, the world expected her to follow the script laid out for her. But Bridget never saw herself as a product of legacy. She was a quiet observer in a very loud family. Growing up in Los Angeles, Bridget experienced the unusual reality of being surrounded by cameras, celebrity, and conversations that revolved around scripts, premieres, and awards. But unlike many who grow up desperate for attention, she always seemed to pull inward. She lost her mother to divorce early in life, which made her bond closely with her father. Peter Fonda was not the typical hands-on Hollywood dad, but Bridget understood him. He was a man shaped by loss, rebellion, and the weight of fame. In some ways, he passed that weight down to her not as pressure, but as something she would need to either carry or release. When Bridget was just a teenager, she dipped her toes into acting not through a flashy debut or media-fueled launch, but with small, thoughtful roles that let her learn quietly. She studied drama at NYU and the Lee Strasberg Theater Institute, showing that she was not trying to coast on her name. She wanted to earn her place, but still, it was hard for anyone to see past the last name. There was always the question whispered behind closed doors, is she really talented or is she just a Fonda? What made Bridget different from many Hollywood children was how grounded she remained. She rarely appeared in tabloids. She was never linked to wild parties or messy scandals. She kept her circle tight, her interviews professional, and her work consistent. Still, no matter how humble she tried to stay, people had expectations. They wanted her to be the next Jane. They wanted her to dazzle and dominate. But Bridget seemed more interested in exploring the art of storytelling than in playing the fame game. For the viewers watching her rise, she felt different. There was a rawness to her performances, a vulnerability that felt authentic. She did not need to scream for attention. She let the work speak, and in that quiet confidence, audiences found something rare. She was not trying to impress. She was simply trying to be real. In an industry obsessed with reinvention, Bridget Fonda seemed to be one of the few who just wanted to stay herself, and maybe that is where the mystery begins. Because for someone raised in the heart of fame, Bridget never seemed to chase it. Instead, she studied it, respected it, and ultimately questioned if it was worth keeping at all. Lights. Camera rebellion. By the early 1990s, Bridget Fonda had moved from promising newcomer to full-fledged star, but she did it her way. While many actresses of her generation leaned into traditional glamour or romantic comedies, Bridget carved a different path. She chose roles that were layered, sometimes dark, often complex. In Single White Female, she played a woman whose life is slowly taken over by her obsessive roommate. In Point of No Return, she portrayed a convicted criminal transformed into a government assassin. These were not roles designed to make her America's sweetheart. They were messy, they were demanding, and she embraced them fully. But it was not just the script she chose that set her apart. It was her presence on screen. Bridget brought a kind of unpolished honesty to her roles. Her characters often felt like people you might know. There was always a vulnerability just under the surface, and that made her work resonate with viewers. She was not trying to be the most beautiful woman in the room. She was trying to be the most real. That commitment to authenticity, especially in an industry that thrives on illusion, earned her respect. Directors admired her work ethic. Audiences trusted her characters. And yet, with all this praise and rising success, Bridget never seemed fully invested in chasing more. There was something about her that always hinted at distance. A slight hesitation in interviews. A quietness at public events. It was as if part of her was always somewhere else, watching everything with a knowing glance. Maybe it was a form of self-protection. Maybe she knew what Hollywood could do to people, especially women, especially those who refused to play by the rules. Behind the scenes, she kept a low profile. No flashy entourage, no desperate attempts to stay in the headlines. She worked, she delivered, and then she disappeared back into her private world. For many fans, this only made her more intriguing. Bridget was the actress you rooted for, not because she was the loudest or the most photographed, but because she felt honest. She was the friend who would tell you the truth even if it hurt, the woman who would choose peace over popularity. And perhaps that is why, even during her peak, she remained somewhat removed from the Hollywood machine. It never fully swallowed her, but fame is not something that always waits patiently. It demands more exposure, more interviews, more willingness to play the game. Bridget was not willing, and slowly the signs began to show. Fewer roles, less public visibility. She turned down projects that others would have killed for. She began to prioritize different things. For most people watching from the outside, it looked like she was fading. But the truth was more complicated. Bridget was not fading, she was stepping back deliberately. She was rethinking the price of attention. At the height of her career, Bridget Fonda made a quiet decision that few ever do. She chose a life that made sense to her, not one that pleased the world. Stardom on her own terms. If Bridget Fonda was drifting away from Hollywood by choice, then her role in Jackie Brown was the unexpected spotlight that brought her name back to the center. Directed by Quentin Tarantino, the film was packed with big personalities and sharp dialogue, but even in a cast that included Samuel L. Jackson, Pam Grier, and Robert De Niro, Bridget stood out. She played Melanie, a laid-back surfer girl caught in a dangerous web of greed and deception. It was not a flashy role, but it was the kind of part Bridget knew how to own. She delivered her lines with a natural coolness that made Melanie unforgettable. What made this role significant was not just the performance, it was what it represented. Tarantino was known for resurrecting careers, for giving actors a second wind. When Jackie Brown premiered in 1997, many believed it was just the beginning of a bold new phase for Bridget. She had proven she could hold her own with cinema legends. Critics praised her timing, her restraint, her ability to balance charm and danger. For a moment, it felt like Bridget was stepping into the next level of her career. But behind the camera, something else was happening. While the industry wanted more from her, Bridget was beginning to want less. The attention that followed Jackie Brown was not something she embraced. The interviews, the appearances, the sudden increase in pressure to maintain momentum, it was all exhausting. And Bridget was tired of pretending it was not. She had always treated acting like a craft, not a lifestyle. And now that her name was rising higher, so were the expectations she never asked for. People close to her said she started turning down roles that felt empty. She was not interested in playing the same characters over and over. She wanted stories that meant something, characters that felt human. But the industry was moving in a different direction. The late 90s and early 2000s saw a shift toward big-budget franchises and media spectacle. Bridget did not fit into that mold. She did not want to be a superhero. She did not want to reinvent herself for the sake of relevance. She wanted space to breathe. And so, even after a high-profile project like Jackie Brown, Bridget retreated again. Not in bitterness, not in scandal, just in quiet conviction. For the average person, this is what made her story feel so different. How many people do you know who have walked away from success not because they failed, but because they had enough? Bridget's choice was rare. It was quiet. It was easy to miss. But it was powerful. Because in a world that tells you to keep climbing no matter the cost, she chose peace. She chose a slower life. She chose to define her worth without an audience. And that is something many people dream about but are too afraid to do. Bridget Fonda did it while the lights were still on. The Quentin Tarantino connection. As Bridget continued stepping back from the noise of Hollywood, life quietly presented her with something that would change her focus completely. In the early 2000s, she met Danny Elfman, the renowned composer behind dozens of iconic film scores. Known for his work with Tim Burton and his distinct musical style, Danny was a force in the entertainment world. But like Bridget, he had little interest in the superficial side of fame. Their connection was not explosive or dramatic, it was grounded, private, real. And that was exactly what Bridget needed. Their relationship blossomed away from the cameras. No media circus, no red carpet declarations, just two people choosing each other outside of public expectations. In 2003, they got married. For the first time, Bridget seemed completely at ease, not just in her personal life, but in the decision to fully walk away from acting. Around that same time, she was involved in a serious car accident. The physical injuries healed, but it left her thinking differently about everything. Pain has a way of rearranging priorities. When life knocks you off your feet, you start asking what is truly worth standing up for again. For Bridget, the answer was not another movie role. It was not the chase for awards or critical praise. It was family, love, privacy, and soon after, motherhood. She and Danny welcomed a son, and with that, Bridget's life changed in the quietest but most permanent way. Acting became part of her past, not her present. She never held a press conference to say she was retiring. She simply did not return. No dramatic goodbye, no interviews explaining her absence. She just began living a different life. For many viewers who grew up watching her, this was confusing at first. In a world where celebrities document every meal and every thought, Bridget's disappearance felt like a mystery. But for those who looked closely, the signs were always there. She never craved attention. She never played the fame game. So when she chose to put her energy into raising her son and building a life far from the spotlight, it was not surprising. It was honest. There is something deeply relatable about a person choosing to walk away from what does not serve them anymore. We all reach moments in life where we must decide between what looks good and what feels right. For Bridget, the answer was clear. Fame had given her opportunity and pain. It had shaped her but never fully satisfied her. With Danny and her son, she had something more lasting, something no script could offer. Bridget Fonda made a decision that many dream about but few have the courage to follow through with. She chose a quiet life, a home filled with music instead of paparazzi, mornings without call times, evenings without makeup artists, just life simple, sacred, and entirely her own. While the world waited for a comeback, Bridget was already living the role of a lifetime, not on a screen, but in the life she built behind it. Love, Danny Elfman, and a shift in priorities. Years passed. Hollywood moved on, as it always does. New stars emerged, trends shifted, and the industry barely paused to notice that Bridget Fonda was no longer around. For a while, her absence blended into the natural rhythm of fame, one actress stepping aside as another took her place. But for those who remembered her, who watched her quietly disappear after marrying Danny Elfman and embracing motherhood, there was always a lingering question. Would she ever come back? People assumed maybe she was taking a break. Maybe she would reappear one day on a Netflix show or in a surprise film festival role. That hope hung in the air for nearly 2 decades. Then in 2022, Bridget Fonda was photographed for the first time in years. The images were not planned. She was not walking a red carpet or doing a comeback interview. She was running errands, dressed comfortably, wearing no makeup, looking like any other woman handling everyday life. The photos exploded online within hours. Headlines popped up across tabloids and entertainment blogs. The comments were relentless. People compared her to her younger self, dissected her appearance, and speculated about why she had changed. But they missed the real story. What those photos captured was not a tragedy or a fall from grace. They captured reality. Bridget was no longer living to impress anyone. She was no longer maintaining a public image. She was living her life on her own terms, aging naturally, embracing comfort, and prioritizing family over fashion. But the internet, conditioned to idolize youth and perfection, reacted as though she owed them something, as if a woman cannot grow older without explanation, as if the only acceptable story is one of eternal beauty and endless relevance. What happened to Bridget Fonda was not failure, it was freedom. She stopped performing long before the cameras stopped rolling. She let go of the pressure to be a symbol. In a world that often values women for how long they can stay young and visible, Bridget stepped into invisibility with grace. And that is what made those photos so jarring for the public. They showed what most celebrities are afraid to reveal, that beyond the makeup, the lights, the gowns, there is just a human being trying to live in peace. For many viewers, especially women, those images were not disappointing, they were refreshing. They reminded us that it is okay to walk away. It is okay to change. It is okay to live quietly without apology. Bridget Fonda did not vanish. She simply chose another path. One that is harder to understand in a fame-driven world, but deeply relatable to anyone who has ever wanted more than applause. Those photos may have reignited public curiosity, but they did not change her. She did not respond. She did not explain. She continued living her life. Because in the end, the most powerful role Bridget Fonda ever played was herself, away from the noise, beyond the camera, fully and completely real. The car crash that changed everything. The images of Bridget Fonda in 2022 may have shocked the world, but they did not seem to shock her. That in itself says everything. She was not wearing designer sunglasses or strategically placed accessories. She was not rushing to hide from the camera. She simply went about her day, moving through a parking lot with a quiet kind of confidence. There was no attempt to play catch-up with who she used to be. She had already made peace with the fact that she had nothing left to prove. And maybe that is what unsettled so many people. The idea that a former Hollywood star could age naturally, live simply, and not seek validation for it. For the average person, that moment was deeply human. It mirrored what many feel as they grow older. The discomfort of no longer fitting into what the world expects. The pressure to maintain an image that no longer fits the life you are actually living. Bridget had the chance to play that game, and she walked away from it. Not because she lost anything, but because she found something more valuable: herself, her family, her rhythm. Not every woman wants to freeze herself in time. Not every person wants to remain a character for public consumption. The truth is that aging in public is rarely kind, especially for women. In Bridget's case, the response to her appearance revealed more about society than it did about her. People were not reacting to who she was. They were reacting to the idea that she had stopped performing. And in a culture where performance is often mistaken for purpose, that can feel like betrayal. But for those watching closely, Bridget's decision to stay out of the spotlight after those images went viral was not silence. It was a statement. She had already chosen her peace over performance. No headline could drag her back into a game she had already won. Behind closed doors, Bridget continued doing what she had been doing for years, being present for her family, raising her son, supporting her husband, living life without filters or red carpets. That choice may not make her trending on social media or featured in awards shows, but it makes her story relatable in a way most celebrity tales are not. Because there comes a time in many people's lives when they ask the same question Bridget answered years ago: what matters more, being seen or being at peace? It is easy to chase admiration. It is harder to walk away from it. Bridget did what many only dream of. She stopped letting the world dictate her value. She chose a life that made sense to her, even if the cameras were no longer watching. And that decision, more than any role she played on screen, revealed her true character. While the world debated her appearance, Bridget Fonda was somewhere laughing with her son, cooking dinner, or watching the sunset without needing anyone's approval. And that is a kind of freedom most people spend their whole lives trying to find. Hollywood's reaction, and then silence. In the months that followed the viral photos of Bridget Fonda, something interesting happened. The conversation slowly shifted. At first, it was fueled by shock, curiosity, and unkind comparisons. But then something softer began to take shape. People started to reflect, not just on Bridget, but on the pressures placed on women, on aging, on how success is measured. What began as gossip quietly turned into recognition. Bridget had done something few people in her position ever dared to do. She had walked away, not in bitterness or shame, but in full awareness of who she was and what she wanted her life to look like. Viewers began to see that Bridget's story was not about a career cut short or a woman who let herself go. It was about boundaries, It was about listening to the quiet voice inside that says, "Enough is enough." Bridget chose to no longer perform for a world that never really knew her. And as more people revisited her films and interviews, they saw the signs. She had always been more introverted, more thoughtful, more grounded. She had never chased the spotlight. She had only tolerated it for the sake of the work. When the work no longer filled her, she stopped showing up. It was that simple. In a world that constantly pushes people to do more, be more, stay visible, Bridget's choice was radical. But it was also deeply relatable. So many people spend years grinding through jobs that no longer fulfill them, maintaining friendships that no longer bring peace, chasing dreams that no longer reflect who they are. Bridget's decision gave others permission to ask the same question. What if I stopped running and started living? For mothers who have sacrificed ambition for family, Bridget's story hit home. For women who are tired of being told their worth is tied to how they look, she became a quiet symbol of resistance. And for anyone who has ever needed to start over, her absence from Hollywood felt less like a disappearance and more like a declaration. She was not lost. She was found. Just in a place most people are too afraid to look. People began to understand that success does not always come wrapped in applause. Sometimes it is found in the slow mornings, in the walks without cameras, in the decision to trade status for sanity. Bridget Fonda showed that you can let go of a version of yourself that the world loved and still be whole. You can exit the stage without regret. You can be forgotten by headlines and still remembered by those who matter most. Bridget's life now is not a spectacle. It is not documented or broadcasted. It is private, intentional, and probably very ordinary. But that ordinariness is where her power lies. Because when the makeup is wiped away, when the cameras stop flashing, the question remains, who are you really? Bridget Fonda answered that without ever saying a word. Life outside the spotlight. As the noise around Bridget Fonda began to quiet once more, her story remained in the background of pop culture conversations. Occasionally, her name would trend again when another photo surfaced or when someone revisited her films. But Bridget herself never returned to offer a comment or correction. She never issued a public statement. She never gave an interview to explain her choices. That silence spoke volumes. Because while the world still longed for closure, Bridget had already made peace with the chapter she had closed. She did not need to clarify the reasons for her absence. She was not missing. She was simply not participating. That distinction matters. For so many, the idea of walking away from a successful career sounds unthinkable. It challenges everything we are taught about ambition and identity. Society teaches us to be seen, to stay relevant, to fight aging with every dollar and every filter. But Bridget Fonda did something deeply human. She allowed herself to change. She did not cling to the image of who she once was. She accepted the evolution that time demands of all of us. That honesty is what makes her story so relatable. Because no matter where we come from or what we do for a living, we all reach a moment where we must choose between performing for others or living for ourselves. People who knew her during her acting years say Bridget was always sharp, thoughtful, and clear about her values. She respected the craft of acting, but she never seemed intoxicated by the fame that came with it. So when she left, it was not out of defeat. It was out of clarity. She understood something that takes many people a lifetime to learn, that no amount of public praise can replace peace of mind. She did not need applause to feel worthy. She had already lived through enough of Hollywood to know that the spotlight often blinds more than it reveals. What makes Bridget's story even more powerful is how ordinary her life became. Not tragic, not dramatic, just ordinary. She became a mother, a wife, a woman who shops for groceries, picks up takeout, walks around the neighborhood without a stylist nearby. And in that ordinariness, there is something radical, because it reminds us that value is not measured by visibility. A quiet life is not a lesser life. It is simply a life not built for consumption. Bridget Fonda reminds us that you do not need to explain yourself to the world when you are already at peace with your own decisions. Her story is not just about fame or retreat. It is about the freedom to evolve, to outgrow the old narrative, and to write a new one without needing permission. And maybe that is why her story lingers, not because she vanished, but because she lived, fully, quietly, and most importantly, on her own terms. The photos that shocked everyone. When you really look at Bridget Fonda's journey, it becomes clear that her story was never about walking away from fame. It was about walking towards something else, something deeper, something that had been calling her long before she ever appeared on a movie screen. For years, she played characters who were searching for themselves, trying to make sense of the chaos around them. But the role she chose for herself was far more grounded than anything the industry could have offered. She chose a life that fit her spirit instead of her resume. By the time the public realized she was gone, Bridget had already created a new rhythm. Her mornings were no longer shaped by call sheets or auditions. Her evenings were no longer lit by red carpets and flashbulbs. Instead, her days were filled with things many people take for granted until they are taken away. Breakfast with her son, quiet drives, time to think without interruption. In a world that constantly pushes for more attention, more likes, more money, Bridget had quietly declared that enough was truly enough. And in doing so, she offered a new definition of success, one that does not demand applause to be valid. It is easy to assume that when someone disappears from public view, something went wrong. That assumption reveals how conditioned we are to believe that visibility is the only proof of value. But the truth is that many people reach a point where they have to choose between the person the world sees and the person they actually are. For Bridget, the choice was not dramatic. It was not fueled by scandal or burnout. It was slow, steady, and intentional. She simply let go of the version of herself that was built for others and embraced the version that belonged only to her. And that choice is not unique to Hollywood. People everywhere face it in quiet ways. The teacher who steps away from the classroom to care for a parent. The lawyer who closes her practice to raise her children. The man who trades a high-paying job for peace of mind. Bridget's story echoes in those everyday decisions. It reminds us that value is not always public. Sometimes it is found in the quiet corners of life that no one else sees. Sometimes it is in the soft laughter over dinner, in the freedom to wear what feels comfortable, in the courage to be unseen. By now, the world has mostly stopped asking when Bridget Fonda will return. There is an understanding that she never really left. She just moved into a space where she did not have to be anyone but herself. And in a world full of noise, that kind of peace is not just rare, it is powerful. It is a reminder that sometimes the greatest act of strength is not in holding on, but in knowing exactly when to let go. Bridget Fonda did just that. And in doing so, she found something the cameras never could capture. She found her life, why she will never return. As time moves forward and the entertainment industry continues its endless cycle of new faces, new trends, and louder spectacles, Bridget Fonda's absence stands as something almost sacred. Not everyone may have understood her decision, but those who have lived long enough, loved deeply enough, or lost themselves somewhere along the way, know exactly what it means to retreat from the noise and choose stillness. Bridget did not run away. She simply stopped needing to be seen to feel whole. And in a world where being seen is often mistaken for being valued, that decision is rare. There is something profoundly human about stepping away without bitterness. She did not give dramatic interviews or pen a tell-all book. She did not go online to correct rumors or argue with strangers. She just kept living. Her name would trend occasionally, usually accompanied by side-by-side photos from her acting days and recent candid shots. But she never took the bait. She never tried to explain herself or control the narrative. That kind of silence takes strength. It is not the silence of defeat, but the silence of someone who knows her worth is not up for debate. Many people who watched her films in the 90s have since grown into new phases of their own lives. They have raised families, changed careers, aged into a different version of themselves. And in doing so, they began to understand Bridget's journey in a much deeper way. It is not about fame or nostalgia anymore. It is about identity, about choosing peace even when the world expects performance, about understanding that who you are when no one is watching is often the truest version of you. There is no guarantee that Bridget Fonda will ever return to acting. And by now, most people have accepted that she probably never will. But perhaps that is not the point anymore. Her greatest legacy may not be a particular role or film, but the quiet example she has set. She proved that it is possible to walk away from something the world idolizes and still have a rich, meaningful life. She showed that personal fulfillment is not always public, that love, motherhood, privacy, and quiet joy are just as valuable as awards or box office numbers. For those who feel pressure to stay relevant or constantly perform, Her story is a gentle reminder that you are allowed to evolve. You are allowed to change your mind. You are allowed to want something different. Bridget Fonda never made a dramatic exit. She just made a choice, and she stood by it. And that quiet conviction, that unwavering peace, may be her most powerful role of all. In the end, she did not need to be rescued. She did not need a comeback. She simply needed room to breathe, and she found it, not in front of the camera, but far away from it. A life less photographed, but no less beautiful. A story that continues even when no one is watching. How Bridget Fonda quietly won. As Bridget Fonda's story continued quietly beyond the reach of celebrity headlines, the world around her changed. The industry she once belonged to became almost unrecognizable. The rise of streaming services, social media influencers, and constant digital exposure reshaped the meaning of fame. Privacy became harder to protect, authenticity became harder to find, and attention became currency. Yet even as this new world took shape, Bridget remained untouched by it. Her decision to live outside of the spotlight looked even more radical in a time when most people voluntarily gave away their privacy for approval. For the average viewer, it was impossible not to compare. Every scroll through social media brought images of carefully curated lives, edited bodies, and staged happiness. And then there was Bridget, living a real life that was no longer being broadcast. She did not compete for likes or resurface just to remind people she existed. That quiet refusal to play the game became more powerful than any spotlight. While many were chasing relevance, she had already found contentment. She showed that it was not only possible to leave behind a public identity, but that life could actually begin once that identity was stripped away. For those going through their own transitions, retirement, parenting, health struggles, aging, Bridget's journey became. She reminded people that it was okay to change direction, that a new season does not erase the value of the last one. The message behind her disappearance. There is something timeless about Bridget Fonda's decision to disappear. In a culture where everything is documented, shared, and replayed, her silence stands like a wall against the pressure to perform. Most people grow up believing that to matter, you have to be seen, that to be successful, your life must be witnessed, validated, and approved by others. But Bridget's life says something different. It says that you can matter quietly, that you can protect your peace by protecting your privacy. And perhaps that is why her story still touches people, even in her absence. Because deep down, many are tired of the constant need to be available, to be liked, to be enough for everyone. As the years passed and Bridget stayed out of the spotlight, many started to admire her in a new way. Not just as the actress who gave unforgettable performances in films like Jackie Brown or Singles, but as a woman who made a firm and lasting choice. She never returned for a nostalgia project, never signed a book deal, never gave a last interview to explain it all. Instead, she honored the boundaries she drew. And that kind of consistency is rare. It speaks to a deep sense of self, the kind that is not shaped by attention, but by intention. There are people who spend years trying to figure out what will make them feel whole. They jump from job to job, relationship to relationship, city to city, looking for a version of life that feels like home. Bridget Fonda found it not by chasing more, but by stepping away from everything that did not serve her anymore. For those watching her from afar, that realization can feel like a mirror. It challenges you to ask what you are holding on to just to be accepted. What part of your life looks good from the outside but drains you quietly from within? It is easy to imagine that if she had stayed, Bridget might have had an even bigger career. More awards, more magazine covers, more interviews. But it is harder to imagine that any of those things would have given her what she has now. A quiet, grounded life with the people she loves. A chance to raise her son without flashing cameras. The ability to walk through a grocery store without being a headline. These are small things, but for many, they are everything. They are the parts of life that cannot be bought or staged. And so, Bridget Fonda remains a rare figure in the world of entertainment. Not because she had the longest career or the biggest fame, but because she chose herself when it mattered most. Her story continues not in the pages of tabloids, but in the quiet example she set. For anyone who has ever needed permission to rest, to walk away, to be something other than what the world expects, Bridget's life stands as a gentle reminder. You are allowed to live your life even if no one is watching. Bridget Fonda's story is not a cautionary tale or a mystery. It is a reminder that you are allowed to outgrow old versions of yourself, that success does not always mean staying visible, and that peace is sometimes found in the quiet places far from applause. She did not vanish, she evolved. While others chased relevance, she embraced authenticity. While the world asked for more, she chose less, and in doing so, found more than fame could ever offer. Her life is not defined by the roles she played, but by the courage it took to stop performing. So if you have ever felt tired of pretending, if you have ever wondered what it would mean to choose yourself fully, remember Bridget. She showed us that it is not just okay to walk away. Sometimes it is the most powerful thing you can do. And that, perhaps, is her greatest role of all. What can you say about Bridget? Share your thoughts in the comments. Remember to hit the like button and subscribe. Before you go, click on the next video on your screen.